It's too much of a Bieber look.
Yeah. Hey everybody, welcome back to Listography. Jason, Joe, and Kramzer here. Today we are counting down slightly smaller discography, 5 albums of Simon and Garfunkel, legendary folk duo from the 60s.
I've always liked them a good bit. I think I always knew the final 4 albums. Never really listened to Wednesday Morning 3 a.m. until we started doing the album of the years. So once we got into that, that's when I finally dove into that album. And I'll say this, I've never really gotten into them. I've never had a big phase. Like I listened to Bookends, I think, in my freshman year of college, and then maybe Bridge Over Troubled Waters a couple years after that. So like sporadically throughout my time, I've listened to the albums. But this is like the first just foray into Simon and Garfunkel week, and I loved it. Up until now, pretty much every artist we've done has either pretty much stayed where I've initially thought they were in my heart, maybe a little up or a little down for some. Aerosmith is the one so far that really jumped up for me, and now Simon and Garfunkel was in that category too. Really sucks that they stopped making albums after Bridge Over Troubled Water, because I feel like they were just going up and up and up and up, and it would have been cool to see what they continue to do. I do like some of Paul's solo stuff. I never really cared about Art that much, Art Garfunkel, but I really enjoy all of these albums, and I've never liked Simon and Garfunkel more than I do right now. And then doing this, I also read a lot of cool stuff about them. Like I didn't know that they turned down Woodstock and all of that. So a lot of really cool little tidbits of information.
Simon and Garfunkel was my sister's favorite band growing up, so naturally I wasn't that into them, and I'm still not. I appreciate them, and I like a lot of their songs, but I'm not crazy about the albums as a whole usually. I think they did some really great individual works, but there's, I don't know, a little too much fluff on some of these. I'm not a huge fan of their traditional arrangements, and but I mean, they're good. I understand why people really like them. I have no ill will towards them. I just, not my favorite. More of a Def Leppard fan, so
that's the band you always think of. It's that's what they were thinking after Bookends. Is he going to leave to go form a band like Def Leppard? So, oh wait, you have the shirt on. Never mind. I was like, what an abstract reference. Okay, but yes, you do have the shirt on. Never mind.
Beatles, Stones, Simon and Garfunkel, Def Leppard.
Yeah, right. Pearl Jam and Carly Simon. Like, there's just, you always have those two that you've got them together. What about you, Jason? What are your initial thoughts?
I probably don't know Paul Simon's solo discography as well as I should. I know maybe a half dozen albums pretty well, and the rest I don't really know at all. But where I am now, I would probably say that I like Simon and Garfunkel more than Paul Simon's solo. I like Simon and Garfunkel a good bit. I like Paul Simon too, but not the way some people do. But yeah, I enjoyed going through all the 5 records, and yeah, I probably like them, if not more, as much as I ever have in the past. Who wants to kick it off?
Let me get my opinion out of the way first. At number 5, I have Wednesday Morning at 3 a.m. It's a fine kind of traditional album. I always kind of forget to contextualize. This was 1964. There wasn't a ton of big albums coming out. Things were just kind of starting to get going. So this is kind of a very folky album, lots of covers. The original Sounds of Silence, which I think I prefer to the kind of electrified version that they would do later. A good cover of The Times They Are Changing by Bob Dylan. A good cover of The Sun is Burning by Ian Campbell, which is kind of a creepy song about nuclear holocaust. But other than that, there's just something missing here. I guess it's just, I'm not that into traditional folk, and I think, it's a fine debut, but they would go on to bigger and better things.
Absolutely. I think this is the easy choice for number 5, Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. It's just a little bit too mundane compared to their other stuff, although too much, just like Joe said, traditional folklore. It's just very acoustic heavy, not very experimental, very safe. It's like a very watered down version of Bob Dylan at the time, without kind of the ego. The harmonies sound really good. That's probably the strong suit. Sparrow is great. Sound of Silence is good, although I like the electric version a little more. I like He Was My Brother, but it doesn't have a whole lot to say, and there's a little too much of like that gospel rootsy stuff to it for my taste, and it's got some delightfulness on it, but it's pretty weak compared to the other ones, a little lifeless and dull. Nothing really to complain about, but I think this is the clear number 5. I think there's a clear number 1, and then I think 4, 3, and 2 are almost interchangeable, so we'll get to that.
All right, my number 5 is also Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. I like it. I don't know if it's fair to say that I'm probably the biggest folky of the three of us, maybe. Okay. But I think it's good. But I also agree that, the songwriting gets better as they head through their careers. I think they also get better at arranging and doing different stuff in the studio as well. I don't think it's like way worse than their other stuff. I think maybe this record is maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, this is, a 7.2, and maybe their best record is like an 8. So there's very little separating the 5 of them for me. So that's my number 5. I do think it's good, and I'm with Joe. I do like the version of Sound of Silence on this record a little better than the electric version.
Okay, well, speaking of the electric version, my number 4 is going to be Sounds of Silence, and 4 and 3, which I'll reveal later, are basically, they're separated by like the tiniest bit, and really the only thing I chose the one based on kind of the big song from it, which I like a little bit more than the big song on this, which is I'm a Rock, I think is their first like really good song. Just kind of that's kind of how I associate Simon and Garfunkel songs like I'm a Rock, less so the traditional folky stuff. And this one's, it's a solid album. I think the electric version of The Sound of Silence is good. I like Leaves Are Green, Kathy's Song, Somewhere They Can't Find Me, Richard Quarry. There's really not any bad tracks on this one. And I feel like this is the one that's sort of not really an album. It was kind of rushed just to kind of get like singles and stuff on to one album. So it doesn't maybe have the consistency and the coherence of the other 3 albums, but I think they did a pretty good job with this one, and it's a good album. It's the second worst in my list, but it doesn't mean it's a bad album. There's really no bad album. That's another thing to remember when doing like a discography this short. People might get upset because this is the 4th place. This is the second worst one, but there's not really any bad albums in this. It's just sort of very slight differences in kind of goodness.
Yeah, but the last really short 5-album discography we did was The Police, and I think that they do have a bad album. However, we had a lot of heat for that, a lot of big Regatta de Blanc fans. But I know exactly what you're saying about Sound of Silence. It was rushed to be recorded, but I believe the songs had been written before and were around. But then, once Sound of Silence, the track off Wednesday morning, kind of started to heat up, which was also kind of like the first big college rock song I was reading. Like that was the audience that started to get it moving, was like late night New York, like college students really fell in love with that tune. So I see what you're saying with Sound of Silence. I agree that it's really close to the other one I think you're talking about, which I'm about to talk about. And I also think it's really close to number 2 as well. But my number 4 is Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme, an awesome record. I disagree with Jason. I think the other 4 are considerably better than Wednesday morning. I've got 3.5 stars and up for all of these rest of the ones. It's crafted really well and is really cohesive, and it sounds great. For a folk album, it's really full and robust, and it's got a lot of really cool arrangements and production on it, with like more variety, with like bells and xylophones and bongos and stuff really start to come in, and their sound really starts to creep into full spectrum here. It opens with that great Scarborough Fair, like old English folklore kind of tune. The whole album has like this sense of wonder to it that I really like. You can kind of just picture Paul Simon like walking around in like his little suede jacket and catching raindrops and being like, And that's what this album kind of feels like to me. I love Cloudy. I love Homeward Bound. It's a little more rockin'. 59th Street Bridge Song is great. Dangling Conversation is really good, especially the string arrangement. I just think that the songwriting will be a little bit better in my number 3 pick. So number 4, Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme. Also among my favorite herbs.
Joe and I are lining up again. My number 4 is also Sounds of Silence. I like a lot of the songs on this record, but it doesn't have sort of the cohesive sort of album feel that the other 3 after it have, which I think is sort of what holds it back. You got to get really nitpicky with these records because, like I said, they're so close to like the same quality. Really, really hard to rank them. But I do like a number of songs. Leaves That Are Green is really cool. It's got a real Blonde on Blonde kind of feel to it, which is kind of interesting because I think it came out before Blonde on Blonde. This came out in January of '66. So unless it came out like the same week, it must have been a little before. But it really, that organ part on Leaves That Are Green really sounds a lot like it was pulled right from Blonde on Blonde.
I guess we're on to my number 3, which is Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme, which I alluded to, but I feel like it's just a little bit better than Sounds of Silence. And mostly it just comes down to Homeward Bound being maybe my favorite Simon Garfunkel song. Just kind of a big, not quite, it's not in the folk kind of milieu of what they were doing before. It's big and kind of almost a pop song. I really do like Scarborough Fair. I think it's their best traditional arrangement by far. 59th Street Bridge Song is fun. I kind of struggle with if Paul Simon is really a great lyricist. He says a lot of things, and I don't know if they really make sense or if he's just kind of scatting and bebopping and pulling words. But I do think he gets better kind of over the albums as they go on. So despite, Feelin' Groovy is one of those songs where it's like, is this like real? Is he just like really high or what? But there is some, trenchant lyrics in there as well. And I think it's just a good album, slightly better than Sounds of Silence. So it is my number 3.
I don't think there's any doubt that he's a really good lyricist. And obviously this is his early work, but I think you're already starting to see it. Number 3, I've got Sounds of Silence, just a little bit more than Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme, just because I think there's more songs that I really love. When we do our top 10 songs list, I think I've got more off this than Parsley. That's pretty much the big reason why. I just think the songwriting's a little bit better, and I think there's a little bit more intimacy, and I kind of like that vibe a little bit more. But there is some more, experimental stuff compared to Wednesday Morning. I really like sort of like the psychedelic guitar sounds on Blessed, but I absolutely love, like Jason was talking about, Leaves That Are Green. I really like Somewhere They Can't Find Me and how that guitar part kind of comes back for Angie, or however you say it. And then I do like this version of the title of Sound of Silence more, with the more turned up electric nature of it, just because I think it kind of plays to the time a little bit more and puts some urgency in what the song's actually about. Yeah, I've got to put this just a bit more over Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme.
Fully expected that, given that Sounds of Silence made your 66 list. Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme made my 66 list. And that's my number 3, staying in line with Joe. Yeah, I think it's just more cohesive and more of like a complete album experience. There's some like interesting world music vibes on this record. You get like a little Middle Eastern flair on some of the tracks. You've also got sort of the more traditional folk elements as well. I think Sounds of Silence is maybe a little bit more pop folk in a way, but I like a lot of the songs on this record. By the narrowest margin, I like Parsley, Sage, Rosemary, and Thyme better.
Yeah, it's close. There's no doubt it's close. And I remember thinking that when we did the album of the year, I knew one of those was going to make the last spot, but I was like, God, which one? It was tough.
Yeah, I was in the same boat.
As was I. I had Sounds of Silence actually at first on first listen, and then I changed it after, just by the narrowest of margins. Moving on to my second, and I think there is kind of I'm not going to say huge gap between this and the other 3, but I think this one is clearly above Sounds of Silence and Parsley, Sage and Wednesday Morning 3 a.m. And really, I wanted it to be my number 1, but there's just one sort of section of this album that really I don't like. So this is Bookends, and it's a great album, except for tracks 4 through 7, which are mostly completely filler, and I don't like it, and I kind of got turned off by it. It starts with the Bookends theme and then Save the Life of My Child, which is a real cool song. Has a really loud intro and it kind of catches you by surprise because you're thinking, okay, Simon and Garfunkel, and then it's kind of a more, not upbeat, but more energetic song, a little bit closer to, I think, what Paul Simon would sound like later. And then you have America, classic tune, great pop song, and then kind of falls off from there. But then the second half comes and it's 5 really good songs. The second half is almost perfect. Love Faking It, Punky's Dilemma, Mrs. Robinson, maybe their biggest hit, or one of them from the Graduate soundtrack, and then they reused it here. Hazy Shade of Winter, which, I don't know, I might like the Bangles version better, but I like it here as well.
I like the Bangles version more too.
It's a good song. You can tell it's a good song, even in this version. Great album, but I just don't like that one little section of about 10 minutes where it's Voices of Old People. Just doesn't do it for me. Old Friends, kind of a rehash of the Bookends theme. And then it gets good again, but that's kind of just what holds it back from my number 1 spot.
It's also at my number 2. I've listened to this album the most of all of these albums, and I absolutely was positive you would hate that section of the album. We've kind of talked about this on albums before, like the little pieces of non-music that kind of are just parts of the album rather than pieces of music, and we always kind of dissect on those. I usually like them if they're done well, and you usually hate them regardless, it seems. So, yeah, I agree with everything you said. I think this is their trippiest album, and they're starting to really embrace that with kind of that Moog synthesizer that's right off the bat with Save the Life of My Child. That matched with kind of that haunting sampling of Sounds of Silence is really cool. I love the guitar theme of Bookends that comes back and forth for the first half of the album, and I love the theme of the first half of the album, which is just kind of like this child to older age journey. You go from that into America when you're young and angsty and vibrant teenager, and you go to Overs, which is kind of like that jazzy new chord sound that they're doing about like kind of like your college years where you're experimenting and kind of finding your mind. And then Voices of Old People is perfect because it's great. And then Old Friends, you're looking ahead at looking back, and he says like how terribly strange it would be to be 70. It's great. And then the second half just has a lot of really good songs, like you said. Faking It, the last 3 are great with At the Zoo, Mrs. Robinson, and Hazy Shade of Winter. And I think it's awesome. It would be their best album if they hadn't done the one after this, which I expect us all to have at number 1, but let's see if Jason F's it up.
No, I've got Bookends as well. I pretty much don't have too much to add. You guys pretty much said everything there is to say about it, except I think I like sort of what they're going for here with this sort of like suite of songs at the beginning. I think I would like it a little better if it was like flipped and it was front loaded with the hits and then side 2 was the sort of Bookends suite. I think it would work a little better that way, but yeah, overall I like it a lot. I think it's a really good record with a lot of good songs, and I think they're sort of starting to experiment with the album format a little bit as well, and what they can do with it instead of just writing a collection of individual tracks.
Well, I guess this is the rare occasion. How many have we had where we all agreed on the same? I guess Aerosmith would be one.
Is there one other than Aerosmith that we've had the Triple Crown win?
The Clash.
Oh yeah, the Clash.
That's an easy one. I guess this is kind of an easy one too. Bridge Over Troubled Waters, pretty much just loaded with hits. There's no, I'm looking at this, the song list. There's really nothing, maybe So Long Frank Lloyd Wright would be the weakest track, but everything else is pretty much top of the line material. Bridge Over Troubled Water, classic. They kind of, I think they maybe overdo it on the orchestration at the end. I think I like just the solo voice a little bit. And really, the only criticism I have of this whole album is the production and mixing seems a little out of whack. Like some of the songs, like Boxer, El Condor Pasa, like the orchestration is too loud almost sometimes, and it kind of overwhelms the vocals, which I think is the standout. They were really kind of in tune, locked in on this, and the songwriting itself takes it. I think it's another level beyond what they had done before. The Boxer, kind of a jab at the music critics. The Only Living Boy in New York, which was kind of a jab at Art Garfunkel because he was off doing Catch 22. Cecilia. I mean, there's 5 or 6, A-sides on this album. But it's just great songwriting, great performances, more adventurous, different sounds. I think it's a pretty easy number 1.
Yep. The trifecta is real. We've got Bridge Over Troubled Water. It was interesting, Jason was saying, like, this is Bookends was kind of them finding the album format, because I feel like this doesn't really have that cohesive album format. It's just kind of like the first album they did where the songwriting was going to be the main approach, and then it became just like a studio work after that and a studio masterpiece. Because I don't think there's a lot of connective tissue on it. It's a very cosmetic, heavy album. A lot of great hooks and melodies. I think this is like their pop rock album almost, with Cecilia. It's a very loud album for them. Boxer, Only Living Boy in New York, like you said, Why Don't You Write Me? And then, right off the bat with the title track, I think the first song they've done with piano, especially just like straight up piano. It's not about that kind of wondrous, light, lost in the forest folk sound that they were doing now. It's, they're almost become like just straight up songwriters, in the vein of like a George Harrison or something like that, just kind of, and I think it kind of shows that Paul Simon was ready to do something else. And I think this kind of leads into that. I think pretty much all of the production is awesome on it. I disagree with you there, and I think it's unlike anything else. I do think that Frank Lloyd Wright is probably the weakest one on there. That and Baby Driver kind of sound like they could have been on other albums, so I think those are the 2 weakest, but I love it. You're even starting to get a little bit more world music, like kind of that Peruvian sound with El Condor Pasa. It's great. I think it's got just too many really good songs on it, and I really wish they wouldn't have split up after who splits up after their best work? That's tough.
Yeah, so we got the Triple Crown. Joe and I have the exact same list, and I think this might be the first time in the whole history of the channel, even going back to when I was doing it myself, that I have a listography that is completely chronological. So yeah, they got better with every single record. Like you said, great songs. I think the production's pretty good. I kind of see what Joe's saying, though. There are moments where the mixing maybe doesn't seem quite on point, but yeah, just their best songs, and I think it's a lot of their best arrangements. I like a lot of there's some like really cool horn arrangements on this record that are really good. Great vocal performances as well. Art Garfunkel on Bridge Over Troubled Water is like an all-timer. Just knocks it out of the park. So yeah, I think this is their best, not by a lot, but by a hair.
I don't think by a lot either, but I do think it's the best choice. I've had other choices where I've had a number 1 and number 2, and in my head was like, it could be. I can't really see in my ever in the future having Bookends or one of the other ones eclipse it. So I think it's the right choice, guys. We did a good job.
Yeah,
nailed it.
Won a ton of Grammys, like a ton. Not that matters, but
leave your Simon and Garfunkel lists for us in the comments below. Interested to see what everyone thinks. Hit like on the video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell so that you get notifications when new videos come out, and we will see you in the next one.